Hello, everyone, and welcome to Overcoming Backhaul Challenges, a webinar produced by FierceWireless and sponsored by AOptics. I'm Sue Merrick, Editor-in-Chief of the Telecom Group, and I'll be moderating this webinar today. We have a great lineup of speakers. We've got Ed Gubbins, who's the Senior Analyst of Wireless Infrastructure at Current Analysis. We also have Judith Robson, who's on the steering committee of the Small Cell Forum. And we also have a presentation from our sponsor, Christina Richards, who's the Vice President of Marketing at AOptics. You can read their full bios on the right side of your window. And just a few technical notes before we get started. If you have trouble reading a slide, please hold and drag the right corner of the slide window to enlarge it. To download a copy of the slides, you can just click on the Download Slide widget at the bottom of your screen. And also remember that we will follow up the presentations by a Q&A session. So as you're listening to the presentations, please be thinking of questions you'd like to ask our panelists. You can submit those during or after the presentation by using the Q&A box that's on the right side of your window. So with that out of the way, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Ed, please go ahead.
Thank you, Sue. Let's see. I will start by advancing the slide here and introducing myself. As Sue mentioned, I'm Ed Gubbins. I'm Senior Analyst for Wireless Infrastructure at Current Analysis. If you're not familiar with Current Analysis, we provide competitive intelligence and advice across a pretty wide range of technology areas, everything from services to devices to infrastructure. I focus on the infrastructure side, and specifically mobile access infrastructure. So I look at base stations and small cells and microwave backhaul and small cell backhaul. And we have other folks at Current Analysis that look more closely at the fixed line aspects of backhaul. But for today's webinar, I'm going to focus more on the microwave side. That's more my purview. And let me go on to the next slide here. So I won't spend too much time on this. Excuse me, just a quick overview of some of the key areas that represent challenges that the operator has to consider in deploying backhaul networks. I didn't include small cell backhaul in this overview or in my presentation really for the most part, since I know we're going to be addressing that later in the presentation. So I'll go into more detail about some of these areas next. So one of the primary challenges that operators face with backhaul is just keeping up with the rising capacity demands from LTE, LTE Advanced, increasing smart devices, all the traffic on the network. This chart is just to give you a recent snapshot of what some of those capacity needs are like. So this is what Zayo Group in the U.S. is reporting up through the end of last year. So you can see it's rising at a pretty good clip over the last 2 years, breaking past 1 gigabit per second by the end of the year there. So naturally, operators, facing the challenge of how to keep up with that capacity while getting the most out of their existing investments in infrastructure. So, some of the dynamic that this creates is, for example, some of the smaller backhaul system vendors will often use the need to keep up with this capacity as their way in to new accounts operator networks. So they'll tell operators, the system that you have now doesn't support enough capacity. You need to switch to our system to keep up with these rising demands. At the same time, the incumbent suppliers will often say you should add on to your installed systems to build that capacity, and they take a sort of a different kind of a messaging approach to it. So for example, where you see some of the independent vendors like Ceragon or DragonWave talking about how high capacity demands are becoming, you'll see somebody like Ericsson, which is one of the more entrenched backhaul players, say, well, yes, capacity needs are rising, but keep in mind that the big needs are only going to be in a minority of cell sites, and most cell sites will be trailing those needs. So Ericsson has said things like, yes, in a couple years, your busiest cell sites might need a gigabit per second capacity if you're, say, a 3G operator migrating to LTE, but at the same time, 80% of your sites probably won't need more than maybe 200 megabits per second. So applying that 80-20 rule where it suits their own positioning and strategy, and in the midst of all this, operators have to figure out, which of those arguments are the most logical for them. Of course, operators need to make decisions about the best physical media for each particular cell site. Most people will tell you that optical fiber generally offers the best performance, especially when it comes to capacity, but fiber doesn't exist everywhere, and in some cases deploying fiber is either impossible or impractical or just costs too much. So this is a projection from Ericsson about fiber seeing some real growth over the next few years, particularly in eclipsing copper, and you see microwave shrinking a bit. But microwave in the near term still represents about half of the world's backhaul links through 2019. This is, again, according to Ericsson. So obviously this comes down to largely to economic calculations per site. So it depends on the location of the site and how remote it might be, whether it's in the middle of an area that won't allow fiber trenching or hanging, whether it's on the other side of a river or something. And if fiber or copper are difficult to deploy, then there's the question of how much spectrum is available, wireless spectrum to the operator, and in what bands and bandwidths. So this is a business that varies pretty significantly by geography. So in places like Japan and Korea, you see a lot of fiber backhaul. You see more microwave in places like the U.S. and Africa, and increasingly in India. So particularly for operators that are managed by a multinational group like Vodafone, they have to take into account the relevant differences from one geography and one area to the next. And for operators in a particular region, they have to be aware that what works for an operator in another region may not work well for them necessarily. So in the area of microwave backhaul in particular, there are a lot of technologies that have helped boost the performance of these systems to address some of the challenges that I mentioned. So vendors have offered higher levels of signal modulation to increase capacity. This is what we call QAM in the chart there. So several vendors have been offering 2048 QAM for a few years now. They also offer adaptive modulation, so being able to change the modulation when conditions change, like weather, as the situation demands. Using two carriers and MIMO to increase capacity. Some vendors have been talking about 2 gigabits per second capacities and above using those approaches. XPIC is about interference cancellation, so that you can use both horizontal and vertical polarizations in the transmission without interference, and that gives you more capacity. We're also seeing a trend in the increased use of E-band millimeter wave spectrum for these links. That has been proposed by a lot of folks to address small cell backhaul needs in particular, because it's got nice wide swaths of spectrum that's not expensive to obtain or to use, but it has some distance limitations that make it a good fit for the short hops of small cell backhaul. But lately, we've seen more vendors position E-band for macrocell backhaul as well by boosting the performance and strengthening it. So we're also seeing discussions around what is the right level of integration between these microwave radios and the layer 2 and layer 3 switching and routing gear that's also part of the backhaul network. So if you have Ethernet or MPLS functionality in the same box as the microwave radio, does that give you better visibility into the microwave link? Does that give you, better performance? Or is it more cost effective because it's fewer boxes to manage, less site rental fees, fewer vendors to deal with, and so on. On the other hand, you'll have the argument that these integrated solutions won't be as good as best-of-breed solutions from the radio side and the routing side separately. So operators will have to determine where they stand on these kind of debates. Since, at Current Analysis, we focus a lot on the competitive positioning of different vendors and how one competitor stacks up against its rivals. From an operator's point of view, they look at these suppliers to pick partners to help build their networks. There's sort of good news and bad news for them because as it's a fairly precarious space right now for some of the vendors. It's been pretty competitive for a while now. You see the revenue numbers and their trajectory there in the chart, and that's just among some of the independent, publicly held independent vendors that break out this revenue. So you can see that it's pretty tough. We've seen it in multiple rounds of layoffs and restructurings that these vendors have gone through. So the good news for operators is that in all of this, there's some pretty competitive pricing dynamics that tend to favor the operator as a result. The bad news is it makes it harder for operators to invest in a particular vendor because they have to worry, is this vendor going to be a stable supplier over the long term? So on one hand, it's about having the vendor having the R&D and support and scale to deliver what operators need dependably and smoothly. On the other hand, it's about, is this particular supplier going to be around in the same form a couple years from now? So we just saw fastback and sub-10 systems combine on the small cell backhaul side, and we think the macrocell microwave backhaul space is probably going to see some more consolidation soon as well. So if some of these players combine, operators will be thinking about, is the product that I like or that I have in my network, is it going to be discontinued by a newly merged vendor at some point because of its redundancy in the combined portfolio? So Nokia, for example, had been selling Dragon Wave gear for a while, and then it branched out to other partners this year. Now it's trying to acquire Alcatel-Lucent, which has its own pretty significant microwave backhaul business. So what happens to Nokia's partnerships with other vendors? What happens to Alcatel-Lucent's microwave business under Nokia after that acquisition? Operators will have to wait and see. And so all these changes and uncertainties make it a little harder to plan and build and maintain these networks. So I talked about technology trends that we've seen in the market. We can also talk about trends that are starting to come or that we think will come next or down the road. One of them that some vendors have talked about is the idea of applying software-defined networking to backhaul, so separating the control plane from the data plane for a more flexible, efficient network. We've seen that implemented in the mobile core and parts of the transport network, although it's still, fairly new in terms of actual, a real-world application there. But so applying that to microwave backhaul in particular, optimizing the backhaul networks dynamically, reshaping and rerouting traffic based on a broad view of network resources, turning down capacity and power consumption when appropriate and turning them back up, things like that. We've also seen, so front haul is the link between the baseband unit and the radio and antenna in a base station. So often that's from the bottom of the cell tower to the top, and it's typically fiber. But microwave vendors have been waiting for a while for a bigger market for using microwave instead of fiber for those links to help you get to places that it's harder to reach with fiber. And there's a little bit of this being done today, but not all that much. Lately, though, some of the major vendors have been developing technology that would use Ethernet in that front haul link instead of CPRI, which is what's used today, and that would make it easier to use other kinds of media like copper and microwave for that front haul and give operators more flexibility to do centralized or cloud RAN networks, pooling the baseband functionality in big clusters like a data center cloud model. So that's kind of young and sort of emerging. There's also a lot of research being done right now in anticipation of 5G networks in the RAN to develop millimeter wave technologies to play a bigger role in mobile networks than they do today. Excuse me. So beyond small cell backhaul, for example, but that's pretty far down the line. People usually talk about 5G in terms of a 2020 time frame for commercial reality. Probably more in the near term is the work being done to have systems that align themselves in the field for point-to-point millimeter wave links in particular. So especially in small cell backhaul networks where if you have a lot of point-to-point links and you think about the operational cost of aligning them each precisely as they need to be, so these self-aligning features would help. I think that as the outdoor small cell market hasn't quite taken off in the way that maybe was hoped a few years ago, there hasn't been as much urgency in bringing these auto-aligning technologies to market just yet. But they have been, in certain stages of development among several vendors. So when the small cell market ramps up more, you will probably see more of this auto-alignment technology take hold. So that's all from me. I will hand it back to you, Sue, and thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ed. That was a really interesting presentation. Our next speaker, so we'll move right along to Judith Robson, who's with the Steering Committee on the Small Cell Forum. Judith, please go ahead.
Okay, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. So my name's Judith Robson, and as they've said, I sit on the Release Steering Group at the Small Cell Forum, and I also chair the forum's Backhaul Group, and have been doing that for a number of years. So my presentation today is really about the Small Cell Forum and what it's doing about small cell backhaul. So just a quick overview. I'm going to talk about who we are, what we do, and how we do it, and then what we've looked at in terms of backhaul for various different use cases of small cells. So they started off as residential and in the home, and then found their way to the enterprises, and now we're looking to push them outdoors into the urban areas, as well as rural and remote. So this is the way the forum thinks about small cells and different ways of using them. It's also good to hear Ed mentioning the front haul thing. So that's something else that the forum is looking at right now, and we'll be talking about a lot in the near future, which is front haul for virtualized small cells. And I'll touch on that at the end. So just a quick mention of who we are. I mean, we are like 65 operators, so we're an industry forum, independent industry forum, 65 operators representing nearly half the world's subscribers, and it's a total of 140 members overall, including technology providers too. And our mission in life is to accelerate the adoption of small cells. So by that, there's a number of activities that we've been doing for the last few years. One of them is to clarify drivers and provide example business cases. And we identify barriers to adoption, and I think it's widely known that the backhaul and deployment are key barriers that we worry about. We've driven working to standards. So the RUH interface was something that we defined and got through DPP to adopt that. We run interoperability events in terms of plug fests. We talk to regulators. And more recently, we're looking at capturing some of the success stories and best practices that people have learned about in deploying small cells. So there's a lot of activity, especially in North America at the moment, in deployment and people learning where are the sweet spots, where's the low-hanging fruit. So all these activities are things that we do, and we have this thing called a release program, which is how we report these to the public. So what does that look like? On this slide, we divide our kind of small cells into 4 different types: the rural and remote, enterprise, urban, and home. These are different applications, effectively. And for each of those, we've got a number of working groups who all provide a different perspective on what are the challenges and what needs to be done. So we've got a marketing group that looks at the progress and provides case histories. Got a radio group which looks at the technicalities of the radio interface. And carrying on round, you can see other groups like network architecture. And we have a backhaul group as well, which is what I'll be talking about today. And the backhaul group is really looking at understanding the different challenges in different environments and what sort of solutions and approaches can be applied. We do also have a deployment group, which is kind of related because, perhaps people talk about backhaul being a key challenge, but actually deployment of the backhaul is equally challenging. So anyway, our release program is there to provide, cover all different angles on all types of small cells. So this picture is very small, and I'm not expecting everyone to have a look at it. But the idea is just to get a feeling for how much work there's been going on. So for the last 3 or 4 years, we've been producing documents which capture our work here, and there's around 76 there. With over 100,000 downloads. Now, everything I'm going to talk about today is downloadable for free from this website. So you're welcome to make a note of a number if you hear it, and then you can go there and you'll see these maps and you can click to download. So now to backhaul. So what are we doing about backhaul? Right. So starting off in the home, this is where small cells first came from. The lead business case was the femtocell. And this was, the low-cost, compact cellular base station that could be installed by the user and operated over consumer-grade backhaul. So there are now 10 million of those deployed across the globe, and I think it really proves the point that you can do this. Now, from a backhaul perspective, there's not a lot for us to say apart from we defined an interface that was robust and worked, and works over whatever backhaul you've got. So that idea seeded a move into the enterprise, and we've done some work on enterprise small cells. So here you do start to care about the backhaul, and what we've been looking at is how do you characterize that. So what we have in the enterprise is you typically have the operator core network, you have a wide area connection, which is the backhaul part, and then in the enterprise itself you have a number of small cells, or APs as they're shown here, which are connected up over a LAN. So things you need to know how do you configure your LAN, what functions do you have to support small cell services and to ensure your firewalls and everything are passed. And then on the backhaul you need an SLA, which defines what kind of bandwidth you've got and what kind of latency performance and various features like QoS, prioritization and security. So we've got a document number 78 which you can download, which provides lots of information and recommendations on that. And some details about some numbers on what kind of performance you should be looking to achieve on your backhaul connection there. The good thing about, I guess, the enterprise is largely, the enterprise LAN is already there, so you're kind of this deployment is leveraging that installed asset already, and so from the operator perspective, it's not so challenging, to get that connectivity out to the small cells. It's effectively outsourced, often to the enterprise's IT department. But then, I guess the real challenge is in the urban environment. So the small cell forum has what we call urban small cells, and this actually covers a range of different applications, use cases. Really ones that have high demand density. So you're deploying small cells for capacity reasons. So these are kind of retail parks, airports, railways, of course the city centre, and outdoor regions as well. So that's what we mean by urban. And if we look at our urban release, so this slide here again is just looking at all the different things that the forum's done in the urban for the urban use case. And what I've done is I've coloured in all the ones in sort of dark orange colour that relate to backhaul. So you can see there's quite a lot of different places where backhaul is relevant. If I start at the top, if we think about it from a marketing perspective, then just the market drivers and challenges. We see the backhaul appearing as a challenge. We did a business case where we looked at the costs and tried to quantify the benefits of small cells for an operator. And in there, the cost of the backhaul is a significant component that we have to include in the TCO. So it appears there. In our case studies, it appeared. Obviously, going round the clock to a network architecture, the architecture defines the connections between the cells and the core network nodes that need to be transported. So that starts to tell you what sort of requirements. The synchronization as well is an essential part of any cellular network, and small cells too, and that places requirements on transport as well. We've got a detailed document there that we developed in conjunction with the MEF. And then into the backhaul documents, we have one on technologies, which is number 49. So that's requirements and solutions. And we have one sort of more general on the urban environment and the different, as well as the technologies, look at topologies, how the things connect together, the standards that the MEF have produced to let you know what performance you should expect, etc. And then going around the clock, there's some deployment work as well. And again, as I said before, that's important for backhaul. So what I'm going to do in the next 5-10 minutes is just to whistle around each one of those and just give you a one-page, one-liner view of what's in that document. And the reason I'm doing this is to make everyone aware of what's available and some guidelines that will help you understand what the challenges are and how to overcome them. So, moving on, this urban market drivers and challenges contains the result of a survey of operators that we did a year ago, and we asked operators from all over the world what are their top 1, 2, and 3 challenges for small cells, and this graph represents their kind of results. So, the sort of blue lines tell you what their top priority is, and the complete stack tells you what's in their top 3. So we can see that number one top choice, number 1 top 3 is the backhaul availability and cost, and that's something that people are worrying about. But looking to the right, you can see that site locations is also an issue as well. So it's not just the backhaul, it's the site itself and getting power and finding those locations. Okay, so that's one of the challenges. And then something that we try to do is to provide a template business case so that operators can look and understand, where the costs are. And we've researched some numbers on the cost of things. Well, we've got a consultant to do that. And that provides a template, and you can go into that and change the numbers to suit your particular market. As Ed said, it's different in different markets. So this is just one graph out of this document, and it shows we've done a sort of CapEx OpEx comparison of 2 types of backhaul. One of them is we call macro down, which is where you extend your connectivity down from your macro site to small cells at street level, and that's using wireless backhaul and potentially multiple hops. And then we've got a street up version, which is you've got fiber backhaul, you've got fiber to the cabinet, and then you go on from there, maybe trenching to a site and then extending from there on with a wireless link. So just a sort of broad picture of these two, you can see that the backhaul part is a high CapEx. If it's macro down, it's a high CapEx, lower OpEx game. Whereas if it's street fiber, then it's a lower CapEx, perhaps, but a larger OpEx if you're leasing the fiber. Overall, when we did this analysis, we did find sort of the magic number was that small cells TCO was typically around 1/10 of macro, which is, I think, what operators realised needed to be in order to make it viable, given that they have smaller coverage and you'll need more of them. So that was one finding. The other finding is when are operators going to need them, and that really just depends on the market conditions, how much spectrum they've got, how much load they've got, and all those things. So in some regions, we see operators have been forced into the small cell route very early on, in terms of densifying to keep up with capacity. And other markets, the availability of LTE spectrum a few years ago kind of eased that and meant that it bought them some time before they have to deploy. But overall, I think we're seeing in 2015 an uptick in small cell deployments generally. So that time has come, I think. Moving around, there's a very detailed document here, but this is about the architecture, and this is the Small Cell Forum's way of characterising the different components. So there's small cells at one end, and then there's local concentrators, transport network, and gateways, and that sort of thing. So I won't go into detail there, but it really talks about the architecture, the functions you need to achieve from the architecture in terms of, sort of SON, OAM, control plane, and how those can be architected to do that. Synchronization, I mentioned earlier, is one of the functions that you have to achieve, and you know, we've got quite a detailed document there provided by some technical experts who work together with BMEF to say, you know, what are the different options and which ones are suited to small cells. So in the US, you've had CDMA networks in the past, and GPS was needed for all of those to synchronize. But in a lot of places, you don't have visibility of the sky, and you know, but the sync is provided over packet transport. So these have implications on the needs for how accurate your transport needs to be in terms of delay performance. And there's also an interesting section in here in what happens when you do lose your sync. You know, what sort of degradations do you experience in your network? So that's interesting. Moving on, so one of the most popular documents that the forum ever published was this work on Backhaul Technologies, and what we did here was in the earlier days of when there's lots of small cell backhaul vendors coming onto the marketplace with their different solutions, we tried to kind of understand which ones are the best fit to which conditions. So you see here we've got 4 use cases for small cells. So you've got capacity, quality of experience enhancement, and then coverage indoor and outdoor. And then we looked at the classic backhaul requirements, coverage, provisioning, delay jitter, synchronization, etc. And you find that you get slightly different requirement profiles depending on why you're deploying it. So the classic example being, if you're deploying for coverage, you don't really need to necessarily have tons of capacity on your transport. Whereas if you're deploying for capacity, obviously you don't want your backhaul to be limiting the performance of the RAN. So those were our requirements. And then we looked at different solutions and their characteristics. So we had a proponent, we have a vendor of each one of these technologies came along and joined the group, and we discussed, you know, we came to an agreement on what you could justifiably say was the performance under each one of these categories, and to try to kind of map out which ones would do the job. And I think it's widely known that the conclusion of that work was that, you know, there is no one solution which meets all requirements in all cases, but you know, used in combination, you can satisfy those. So, and this is where the toolkit of backhaul solutions came. You know, using fiber when you've got it, going to line of sight wireless if you've got a line of sight, and otherwise using non-line of sight to get to the rest of places. So I thought we're looking at a slightly bigger picture than the technology alone, and we provide a topic brief in this document 95, which covers a whole range of different aspects. So starting from the architecture, looking around to the backhaul requirements in terms of performance, latency, the technologies I just talked about, and the topology is another part, which is when we look at backhaul performance, often we just consider the single technology of a single hop, but what you have to do is combine those together into an end-to-end connection, which has to meet the performance requirements. So it's a bit of discussion on how you do that. Backhaul deployment is another really important part, because you can have a technology that meets the performance requirements, but if it takes you a long time to deploy or it's very expensive, then that can be a challenge. So as was mentioned by Ed, that fiber is great if you've got it, but when you need it, it might be expensive to get there. Well, I think one of the things we've been hearing most often, though, is not so much it's expensive, it's just the time it can take and the lack of predictability about the time it can take to get your site lit up. So often, at the moment, operators are deploying small cells to fix kind of capacity issues or coverage issues in their network to prevent churn. And if it takes several months to get that fixed, then you might have already lost the game. So, you know, rapidly deployable backhaul is really important. And in some cases, operators are talking about deploying a wireless solution to get there quickly and fix it while they're waiting for the fiber to turn up. And that isn't obviously the cheapest thing to do, but it places the emphasis on how important the speed to deploy is. Okay, moving around, so backhaul services, the MEF have a range of what they call implementation agreements, which kind of describe the sort of template of an SLA that you might get if you need to lease a transport connection from a provider. So we've summarized that and pointed to their specs there. So that's a good description of all the different challenges and you know, some pointers to some answers and what people have been doing to date. Okay, just looking at watch. So deployment, as I mentioned, is another aspect we looked at, and we've got a group that looks at the people's tools and processes needed to plan, design, build, and maintain these urban small cell networks. And what we're seeing is that there are lots of new lean automated processes that can be done. For example, using a tablet computer on site at the time and to really speed up the cost of deployment. We're also seeing virtualized core networks, which allow you to kind of have a core network capability online again in days, from when you want it, and then have a pay-as-you-grow model to see how it works. All those things are sort of innovations that we're seeing in the small cell world. Case studies is also another area which is really valuable, is to talk about what people have done and how they're deploying small cells and what they've learned. So there's a range of different examples here in city centres, and then we've got one in Disneyland and some on airports. And this picture here is showing a case that AT&T talked about recently, where they've worked out where to put their small cells, which is in these really inefficient parts of the network where the purple dots are. And they find that if you put small cells there, then you actually, not only do you take those inefficient people and make them have a better experience, but you take that off the macro, and so your macro starts carrying more traffic. So effectively it's onloading the macro as opposed to offloading it. Right, so this is the last piece of this is just that we've also looked at small cells being applied to rural and remote. And so these aren't just, countryside towns in the middle of nowhere. These are things like, emergency relief on cruise ships where you have a captive audience, and some very high value applications like the oil rig here or the military situation on a train. So we've also looked at, and this work was driven by a range of different deployment scenarios that we see for small cells. So people are deploying small cells in all sorts of interesting situations, as you see here. So in emergency recovery kits and ambulances, down mines, supporting telemetry on Formula One cars and NASCAR racing. So we've built a sort of a release around that. And from the Backhaul perspective, I've got quite a detailed chart here, which I'll leave you to look at after the webinar. But really, there is a range of challenges which are to do with why it's difficult to backhaul these things, and so often it's because they're so very far away from existing infrastructure. So it's a large cost involved, but there's not many people at the other end to justify paying for it. So, you need solutions like satellites coming to its own there as a viable way of doing that. And we do see operators deploying small cells at the end of satellites to cover remote regions, and customers are very happy with that. There's also temporary ones, and moving ones. And in the temporary case, we've got a small cell in an emergency recovery kit, which can be deployed and backhauled within 15 minutes of getting it out of the crate. So, it is possible to do these things really quickly and cheaply. Where are we? So just a quick comment on what's next. I mean, our main focus is try to help the industry building up to scale commercial rollout. And so we're looking at the challenges, particularly backhaul and deployment, and understanding, how they can be streamlined and improved. There's something else we're looking at right now is this fronthaul thing that was mentioned earlier. And so from what we see is that there's different ways to, as mentioned, CIPRI and standard base stations can be backhauled, but we're looking at things in between where you can have some of the benefit of centralization without needing to, where you can still do it over Ethernet transport. Okay, so just to wrap up then, we have a release program that reports on the range of activities that you need to accelerate the adoption of the small cell technology and towards scale commercial deployment. And so backhaul and deploy are key challenges that have been identified, and what we've been doing is gathering consensus around what are the best practices and stuff. And so we've shared all these in documents which can be downloaded from our website. So just a final word, if you want to get involved with the forum to shape industry thinking on the evolution of small cells and its transport, then please join up and get in touch. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Julius. A lot of information there. So now we're going to go to our final speaker. This is Christina Richards. She's the Vice President of Marketing with Aoptics. Christina, please go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Sue. Well, I'm really excited to talk to everybody today because so far we've heard a lot about the backhaul challenges and the existing technologies that we've used in the past to overcome those hurdles. But there's actually a new technology that we haven't discussed yet today. It's called laser radio technology, and it's really going to change the way that we look at solving backhaul challenges. Now, many of you are familiar with microwave radio and millimeter wave radio, but you might not have heard about laser radio technology until this webinar. It's important that you do hear about it, though, because laser radio is the true definition of a disruptive technology. And, in telecom, we hear that term all the time. Oh, it's disruptive, it's different. This really is different. And, in fact, it's been recognized by many people for the way it's so unique and innovative. Just recently, we were actually announced as a Gartner Cool Vendor for service provider infrastructure, specifically because of that innovation and the disruptive value that laser radio brings to the macrocell backhaul market. We've also been covered by MIT Technology Review, Wall Street Journal. You've probably seen us in shows on CNN and Popular Science, and other mainstream wireless industry publications. And really all this momentum is because of these unique qualities that we bring to the space. In fact, Fierce themselves actually identified us last fall as an Innovation Award winner, and we've now been deployed with Tier 1 carriers and enterprises in 7 countries across 4 continents. So at this point, some of you are probably asking, okay, that's great, but what is it? What is laser radio technology? Well, the laser portion of the term refers to an advanced form of free space optics, and that's represented in this graphic here by the blue beam. Now, this is the half of the technology that sends out an infrared light that carries 2 gigabits of data point-to-point line of sight across a single hop of up to 10 kilometers. Then the radio portion of laser radio refers to a tightly steered version of millimeter wave, and that's represented here by the yellow beam. And this half of the technology sends out a redundant data stream of the same 2 gigabits of data across the same line of sight. Okay, but now here's where the magic happens. These 2 data streams are then combined in real time at the received site using a proprietary dynamic packet resourcing algorithm that creates error-free output data stream at the termination site. And it's this combination of the diverse wavelengths, the laser infrared light on one side and the millimeter wave radio on the other side, that makes the laser radio so unique from all of the traditional wireless technologies. It's that combination of the complementary wavelengths that allows us to maintain that error-free connection even when you're dealing with heavy rain or fog or even heavy winds. And it also makes it an optimal solution for multi-gigabit wireless transport. We talked earlier today in the webinar about different types of backhaul, and as a multi-gigabit technology, laser radio is really targeted for, I think we're having a little bit of delay on the slide here, it's really targeted for the macrocell and aggregation sites in the cellular network. I apologize, we're having a little bit of delay here. So if you see this diagram of a typical 4G LTE service provider, you see off to the right in purple those smaller cells that Julius was just talking about. Those are your microcells and your picocells and your femtocells. But then as you move left closer to the core, you start to hit the cell sites that are going to need more than a gigabit of bandwidth, particularly as you're deploying LTE and LTE Advanced. We heard Ed talk earlier today about this whole question of capacity, and when you get these sites that need more than a gigabit of capacity, do you swap out for new technology or do you try to build onto the existing? Of course, as laser radio technology providers, we certainly think that going to new technology is going to be the way to go, particularly because you really run into spectrum issues when you start just adding on to old installations. And there's only so much you can do with your modulations to get past that capacity issue. And so it's when you get to these larger cell sites that laser radio really comes into play as a true fiber alternative. Now, you might ask, so what are the requirements for 4G LTE macrocell backhaul? Well, from a technology perspective, it really comes down to a critical combination of 3 things: capacity, distance, and availability. Now, laser radio gives you 2 gigabits of committed information rate. That's full duplex. It's not rate adapted. So even when you get rain and fog and wind coming into play, you're still going to get that 2 gigabits of data rate, and that allows you to engineer your network for your full capacity. Average deployment distances that we've deployed to date are typically in the 5 to 8 kilometer range, which is your average urban macrocell site distance, but we can actually span up to 10 kilometers per hop and unlimited distances in repeater mode. For example, just next week we have a 28-kilometer multi-hop deployment going live in New Jersey. The critical third piece of the technology decision for macrocell backhaul is availability. For example, even though standalone millimeter wave can provide larger gigabit capacities, it's limited in the distance that it can cover while still maintaining that carrier-grade availability. Laser radio, on the other hand, has both the millimeter wave and the free space optics in the same device, and that's what allows us to ensure that carrier-grade availability even in the severe weather. Beyond your technology decisions, you've got the business decisions. So how fast do you need to deploy it? How flexible is your deployment scenario? And how much do you want to pay? Well, in terms of speed of deployment, the AOptics and Telemax can be aligned and operational in just a matter of hours. It's flexible and can go on any type of tower or structure. We have up to plus or minus 3 degrees of twist and sway capability. And we offer the lowest total cost of ownership. In fact, Ovum Analyst Group recently published a white paper identifying laser radio as the lowest cost per gigabit technology in the mobile backhaul space. So I think that's all the time I have for today, but I do want to remind you that AOptics is truly revolutionizing wireless with its laser radio technology. And there is a whole lot more information out on our website at aoptics.com, including white papers and case studies. So be sure to visit and learn more about us and about laser radio and what it can do for the macro cell backhaul market. So I appreciate your time today, and Sue, I'll hand it back over to you.
Great. Thanks, Christina. We already have several questions ready to go, but I'd just like to remind the audience, if you have a question to ask, please just hit the Submit Question button, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So let's see. First of all, let's see. Push this question out. What is the range? The first question is, what is the range of the link with the millimeter wave beam at 2 gigabits per second? I think this was directed to you, Christina. Is that a question, or is that something that Ed can answer? It came in a little while ago. Ed, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, in general, these ranges vary widely from one solution to the next. So I took that question as one for Christine.
Oh,
yeah, I'd be happy to jump in.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Christine.
Yes. So I think it might have been for us because, he specifically said that the 2 gig. And the important thing to know about laser radio is it's a combination of both millimeter wave and laser radio. So we're actually able to go tops up to 10 kilometers because we're using both technologies at the same time. And that, some people ask, okay, that kind of doesn't match with what I'm familiar with millimeter wave. And that's because your experience is with standalone millimeter wave. When you combine the two technologies together, you can expand the capability of the product, and that's how we're able to go those longer distances. But as I mentioned, the average distance of our deployments are more in the 5 to 8 kilometer range, and we do sophisticated modeling to identify what the optimal distance for the required availability in a specific rain region is going to be. But that's the laser radio technology capability. Okay, great. Thank you.
Ed, this question is directed to you, and it's about, because you mentioned E-band. Is the E-band already extensively licensed, or is it still readily available?
Yeah, it's depending on the particular regulatory regime, it's unlicensed or what they call lightly licensed, meaning that it's to use it is the process is pretty nominal. So yeah, that's one of the benefits is that the spectrum is easy and inexpensive to use.
Okay, Julius, this one's for you. You said that small cell TCO, or total cost of ownership, is about 10% of a macro cell. Do you know how much of that is backhaul, or can you give us kind of an estimate of how much backhaul contributes to the total cost of ownership?
Yeah, I had a graph on my slide there showing that, and it was something like, it depends whether you're going for a heavier capex and a lower opex or vice versa. But, it's something like, in the small cell case, something like 40% of the capex for one case was of was for the backhaul equipment and for the installation part. So it's definitely a larger proportion than it was in the macro cell.
A large okay, yeah, you said 40% or so. Okay. Christina, got another question for you. This question is, how does laser radio measure up, or how does that compare to fiber?
Yeah, so compared to fiber, what we're really talking about is flexibility of deployment and total cost of ownership. So that Ovum white paper that I mentioned earlier, it actually goes through a pretty extensive cost analysis of the two compared to each other. But the summary out of that is essentially you get about a 9-month return on investment compared to trenching for new fiber, less than 9 months, and less than 12 months OpEx compared to leasing fiber. And that does vary depending on what part of the world you're in. But particularly in the United States, where you're going to have to pay a monthly fee for leasing fiber, or you're going to have to get right away and try to trench for fiber, then you're going to get quite a bit of savings when you're looking at this wireless replacement for fiber that can still give you 2 gigabits of capacity. Now, one, of course, difference would be if you need much larger capacities, then fiber is going to be able to deliver that. But if you're looking at 2 gig, particularly in the 1 to 2 gig range of capacity, then there's a lot of advantages in terms of speed of deployment and cost of ownership that come in with laser radio.
Right. Ed, I believe this one's for you. And is Europe still primarily microwave backhaul?
For the most part, yes. Europe is more microwave than fiber or copper. But looking forward, particularly in Western and Central Europe, you should see more fiber being deployed over the next several years, and so the microwave component would decrease in proportion. So in Western and Central Europe, it could become the minority over the next few years, and in the area of like 40% or something like that.
Okay, great. Julius, this I believe is for you because it's about small cells. And how successful have non-line of sight technologies been at achieving carrier-grade backhaul availability for small cells?
I think it's got a particular use case, where you haven't got a line of sight or fiber. But I do understand that it's been quite successful, and that operators the performance has gone up. They've got some very high modulations working and some clever beamforming technology, and they are getting good traction in those particular use cases. Also, it's quite quick to deploy, and as I mentioned earlier, at the moment, small cells are being used tactically to fix particular issues, and speed to deploy is a critical issue, so non-line of sight is good for that.
Okay. Christina, one for you. I believe they're saying, is it not harder to align laser-based system than microwave or millimeter wave radio system?
That is such a good question, and it's one of the things that I didn't have really enough time to talk about today, but actually the history of this technology comes out of military applications, and before we built wireless communications products for the wireless space, we used to create wireless networks in the sky where we actually tracked between two moving planes, between the planes and down to 4-inch aperture on the ground, infrared laser-like communication. And so basically we took all the tracking knowledge that we had from those experiences working with the DoD and with DARPA, scaled it down and put it into this unit. So there's actually active tracking in the unit, which not only helps you keep it aligned once the unit is up and installed, but it actually really helps with the installation as well, because we have a technology called point, acquire, and track. You get a very gross alignment between the two units, let the software take over, and it completely does the alignment. The actual alignment process itself takes less than 20 minutes. We've got a lot of great feedback on that it's so much different than people are used to when they're trying to align millimeter wave or even microwave systems, and this aligns both the laser portion of the unit as well as the millimeter wave portion, getting it right on that main lobe. So actually in this unit, it's easier. It's easier to align.
Great. And I'm going to, Christina, we've got another one for you, and I'm kind of going to combine because there's there's been a few on cost. So this question is, what is the total cost of ownership comparison between laser radio compared to standalone millimeter wave or microwave backhaul? Can you kind of address the cost question?
Yeah, when you come down to a cost per gigabit analysis, we actually come in lower than both the millimeter wave and microwave backhaul. And again, I'll point viewers back to that OVM white paper, which you can get on the OVM site. I think it's also available on our site as well. But basically, when you look at a 2 gigabit product over the distances and the availability that we offer, the total cost per gigabit is lower than any other product in the mobile backhaul space.
Okay. And I think there's quite a bit of questions. I believe this is also for you, Christina. It's about the antenna. Is it the antenna technology are you using to transmit millimeter wave beam? Is that for you?
That might be for Ed.
Or is that Ed?
For me.
Oh, okay.
Do
you want to try it?
That we're an E-band millimeter wave product. So that's we're running at the 70, 80 gig range on that side. And then, of course, the infrared light portion is in the terahertz.
Okay. And another one for you, a lot of interest in your company. You mentioned global deployments, and where is laser radio deployed?
Yeah, I'm so glad somebody asked that because we sure love to talk about all of our deployments. So certainly the vast majority of our deployments have been in the U.S. We actually have a couple of trials going on with the Tier 1s in the U.S. as well. And we have a deployment in Canada with a Tier 1 in Canada with Mexican-based CARSA. There's a deployment in Brazil. We have some deployments going into Africa that are for a slightly different application. Instead of mobile backhaul there, we're trying to pull the capacity that is on the coast, each of the African coasts, coming in with the undersea optical cables and trying to pull that capacity inland, working with a partner there called WaveTech. We've got a couple of deployments going up in the Middle East, including Touch Wireless, which is a wireless carrier in Lebanon. And one of our most recent deployments is in Malaysia with a company called NASA. Their premium radius division is deploying 4G LTE in Malaysia, and we're specifically providing their backhaul for that deployment as well.
Okay, and one more. I think this will probably have to be our last question. Christina, I thought this was a good question too. Regulatory requirements. What are the regulatory requirements associated with deploying laser radio?
Yeah, that is a great question. So as you guys know, there's two aspects of the technology. So on the infrared light side, there's actually not a licensing requirement in the same way that you have on your radio frequency technologies. And then, of course, on the millimeter wave side, it's going to be subject to the same requirements that any millimeter wave product would be subject to, which, of course, in the U.S. is a light licensed scenario. So that's going to vary depending on the country that you're in. And, when you look at where our deployments are across the world, it's actually kind of partitioned out based on the availability of the spectrums in the various areas.
Great. I think we're just about out of time. We had a lot of great questions today. We didn't get to all of them. We will try to get back to everyone who submitted a question personally after the webinar. Thank you for attending this Fierce live webinar and submitting so many great questions. I'd like to thank our speakers, Ed Gubbins with Current Analysis, Judith Robson with the Small Cell Forum, and Christina Richards with AOptics. And also like to thank AOptics for sponsoring the webinar today. The webinar has been recorded. You will be able to access the recording within 24 hours on the same page that you used to register for this event. And thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.